Morning, everyone. Anybody have any questions before we get started? Please submit the answers to your discussion questions if you have not already done so. All right, let's pick up where we left off yesterday, where we started discussing first who Mark Twain is. He's an American author, right? He was a riverboat pilot. He grew up in Hannibal, Missouri, famous for his novels and the Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and a lot of his essays. He was a newspaper reporter. But one of the things he was most proud of was being a riverboat pilot. So he has written this essay about how he saw the river right before he was a pilot and how he saw it after he learned about the river. Okay. So why does he choose the block organization for this essay? Please put your answer in the comments. Anyone there? Come on, everybody answer, please.
I think because in this choice he could put more your feelings to explain how he feels in this situation.
That's a good point. Like, because he starts with how beautiful this mysterious river looked to him, right?
Yes.
And he's able to maintain that sense of wonder by keeping it all together. I still kept in mind a certain wonderful sunset which I witnessed when steamboating was new to me. A broad expanse of the river was turned to blood. In the middle distance, the red hue brightened into gold, through which a solitary log came floating, black and conspicuous. In one place, a long slanting mark lay sparkling upon the water. In another, the surface was broken by boiling, tumbling rings that were as many tinted as an opal. So remember the fancy voice I said, if you read it with an appreciation and sort of like savor the words, you get a better idea of why he was considered such a great writer. And then just the beauty in it, right? And plus it's going toward what he's saying about how he thought the river was so beautiful, opal tinted and boiling and tumbling, and all of these words that reflect his wonder to watching the sunset over the river. So putting it all in a block keeps the wonder and the tone going. And the same thing, right, applies to the second part. After he'd learned more about the river and what the signs meant, okay, then if that sunset had been repeated, I should have looked upon it without rapture and should have been commented upon it inwardly after this fashion. The sun means we're going to have wind tomorrow. That floating log means that the river's rising, small thanks to it. That slanting mark on the water refers to a bluff reef, which is going to kill somebody's steamboat one of these nights, right? When they can't see it and they're traveling. So then the contrast is more apparent between his wonder and his innocence at looking at the river versus looking at it with the knowledge he'd acquired of what makes the river dangerous. Then you get that sort of sense of threat that now that he can read the signs of the river exists. So what would have happened if he had like gone back and forth between each point? If he had talked about the slanting mark here and then he talked about it means this and gone back and forth point by point instead of putting it in blocks, how would that have changed your impression of the essay? Devin, what do you think?
I think it is because when he started to be older, his vision about all the river was changing, and the beauty and the romantic place were changing with his point of view.
Right? His knowledge changed him. And here is kind of a before and after. If he had done the point by point organization and broken up the description into good, then turned to bad, then good, then turned to bad, I just think it would be much less effective at showing the contrast between the before and after, right? So, and he's pretty clear. Now, when I had mastered the language of this water and had come to know every trifling feature that bordered the great river as familiarly as I knew the letters of the alphabet, I'd made a valuable acquisition. So he says he had gained something, but I had lost something too. So I've told some of you about this, but having a nice short sentence, he's got this really long sentence. So we're reading as writers, right? He's got this really beautiful long sentence about how he came to know the river, like the alphabet. And then he has this nice short sentence for emphasis right after, but I had lost something too. And it sort of resonates because it's a nice short thought and leaves you with more of an impression. So that's something you can do when you really want to emphasize an idea. Consider making it just a short, impactful sentence. Um, So it just would have reduced the impact, I think, if he had done the organization differently, right? So one of the things I like about Twain, I mean, he has a definite message in here, right? What do you think his message is? I saw the river this way, the romance, the innocence, then I learned it, and I learned the dangers, right? What's his point? This is point about what acquiring knowledge or something can do. What do you think, Jonathan?
I think, in my opinion and my interpretation too, um, his his knowledge about that, it was about his point of view. I think this knowledge was changing uh, in the same time of the his knowledge about the river. I don't know if I am right, but it was my interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, it changed him, right? Knowledge changed him. Generally, we think this is one of the reasons I think Mark Twain is a genius. I love Mark Twain. I'll just be honest. Is because, and a lot of the great writers like Shakespeare, because they don't go for the common lessons like that we all know, like greed is bad. You know, we all know these traditional lessons about life that have been taught through stories, but they look for things that are true that aren't necessarily highlighted, which is the fact that sometimes when you learn about something, it's less exotic and wonderful and romantic than before. So acquiring knowledge can have drawbacks. It is not something we generally teach you, right, in school, because we push the idea that knowledge is good, and it is. Like we had talked about this yesterday. We don't think, he would have given up being a river pilot or knowing the things he knew, because he was very proud of that. It was something he wanted all of his life since he was a boy on the Mississippi. Um, But on the other hand, he also is just acknowledging that sometimes when you learn about something, you can also suffer a loss, which I think is kind of a really interesting and unusual viewpoint, which is why I like this essay. And it's clear in the point that he's making, right? Um, Basically, he's got his thesis here right up front. I'd made a valuable acquisition, he acknowledges, right? But I'd lost something. And then when you get to the end, he clarifies the romance and beauty were all gone from the river. Now it was just sort of a useful catalog of dangers and things to watch out for if he was piloting the river. And then he makes an analogy. Since those days, I have pitied doctors from my heart. What does the lovely flush in a beauty's cheek mean to a doctor but a break that ripples above some deadly disease? Which is kind of a macabre way of looking at, doctors looking at us all like we're about to, get sick and die. Um, Basically, it's what you can lose when you learn, right? Unusual perspectives. So it's like when you're a kid, you know, and everything is so new and fascinating, you know. Remember my kids were little, they'd be like squatting down on the sidewalk watching the bugs, and I'd be like, "We don't have time for the bugs. We got to go do this and that," and you know. But that fascination, that way that we sort of ignore nature and the world around us as we get older, right? So what is something that you saw differently before you know more about it? Like I talked about, if you don't know what hamburger helper is, in America, hamburger helper is like a box that has dried noodles in it and like a sauce packet, which is just powder, and then you add like water and milk to it and cook it all together in a pan. And I just thought that was, you know, it was tasty, you know, gourmet food until I had to make it, and then I'm dumping the sauce packet in, and I'm just like, oh, it's really not that exotic or great. It's just, you know, it just didn't taste the same after that. So has anybody learned about something and that they thought was like interesting, or you know, that you wanted to pursue? Sometimes things that seem out of your reach, once you attain them, they're just like, you're just like, oh, well, that wasn't that hard, right? If I can do it. So what do you view differently after learning about it? Milos, do you have something that you look at differently now that you've learned about it? Anyone? What did you write in your answers?
Like my experience, like how the last question on the at the same. I said like when I was younger, I was like while I was watching like basketball games and how they score like tough plays, I was like shocked, and it's not like normal for me. But when I grow up and when I do that now, it's like normal for me, and it's not like any more surprise for me.
Yes, excellent example. Once you like participate in it, learn how to do it, how it works, you know, it's not quite as, you know, wow, amazing. I mean, it's still amazing, but you know, some of the sort of mysterious power of it goes away once you learn about it. Yeah, good example.
I use it as example my dreams. I think when was we were a child, we have some point of some specific point of view about our dreams, and when you becoming a teenager or adult, you start to change this point of view and start to considering your goals, life goals too. So I think it is a good example for changes. I use it this.
Yeah, our dreams change as they encounter reality, and sometimes that's painful. Yeah, it, it kind of call it the Santa Claus rule too, right? Like when you're a kid, and if you're taught that there's a Santa Claus who comes and visits you on Christmas morning and leaves these presents, and then eventually you learn it's your parents, right? Um, or whoever is in charge of you is leaving you presents. Um, it's that sort of loss of innocence and, you know, sort of tiny disillusionment with reality that we sometimes suffer once we learn about things, knowledge. Mallory, Claire, what do you think? Isabel? Anybody stay away from those shows that show you how magicians do things? I will not watch those because I don't want to lose that sort of like, wow, how did they do that? That's magical. I don't want to see the man behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz, right? I will say that that's one of the areas that I actively avoid gaining knowledge about. And usually I'm very interested to read about all kinds of topics, but that's one I don't want them to ruin for me. Some people, like my daughter, would be fascinated because she's got sort of an engineering mind. You know, they want to know how things work and what the tricks are. I don't want to know. Not about that. You know, I don't think I want to know about how movies are made that much either. Then I'd be thinking about things like lighting and, you know, reading can be that way too, once you know more about it and see the techniques that people are using, right? You start to see how they put things together, and that can distract you from the message. Same thing with art. You know, if you know what goes into something, it's much less amazing than just seeing the finished product. So I just think this is a fascinating essay because it looks at a different perspective of what it's like, you know, about even gaining knowledge, you can lose something. Yes. Has anybody read To Kill a Mockingbird? She has the narrator, she narrates it through the eyes of a child. So all of those things that we have come to accept as true and unfortunate about the world, like racism and unfairness, and bigotry, because Scout, who's the protagonist in the book, is experiencing them new for the first time, it puts us back in that place that we were when we were kids before we knew that things were unfair and that there were large institutions that supported this unfairness and wouldn't do anything about it in some cases. So we re-experience sort of that disillusionment as she learns about the world around her. So it's an interesting book. Anything else anybody wants to say about this essay that you observed?
No, I'm okay.
Annalee, Lily, do you have any comments, questions? Okay. So yeah, something to think about, how knowledge can be a little bit disillusioning, but still, you know, we're going to learn things. We cannot remain childlike. Well, about some things we can. I will about the magician. You know, I refuse to learn. So the next thing I want to talk about, whichever organization you choose for your essay, if you think there's a really strong contrast between the two sides of your controversy, then you might want to consider using the block organization. Okay. If you think that there are two diametrically opposed opinions on each point, then you might want to go with point by point. So instead of talking about everything the proponents believe and then everything opponents believe, you talk about one proponent point and the opposing viewpoint, and you go back and forth. So look at that when you're evaluating your controversy, what kind of controversy it is and what kinds of opinions there are, of which would be the best organization method to really get across both sides of the controversy. So the next thing I want to talk about is, now that you're moving into academic writing, you're going to do a different style of writing. Okay. Academic writing is more formal. It avoids personal pronouns like I and you in favor of third person. Now, if in your draft that slows you down, go ahead and use the personal pronouns. And then when we edit it, I'll show you some tricks for getting rid of the I's and the U's and I think, I believe. If you want to start every sentence with that, it's just really easy to take it out. When we go to edit, you just cross out I think and I believe. So instead of saying, I think that everyone should have car insurance, you just say everyone should have car insurance. And it sounds like a much stronger statement. So don't worry about it so much when you're drafting. But let's look at the different rules that go into academic writing. Let's take a look at this little video that tells you some things you want to avoid doing, all right, when you're writing academic style.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and in today's lesson, I'll explain 12 common errors that students make in academic English. Now, what's academic English? It's the English that you need to use in school, college, or university when you're reading, writing, listening, and speaking, okay, ideally, but most importantly, when you're writing. Now, what's the difference between academic English and general English? Well, academic English in general, there are many differences, but in general, academic English is more formal, it's more objective, and also it has to use a lot of referencing. You always have to let people know where you got your information from. You have to cite the source. You have to give the source. You can't claim to write something and claim it as your own. Okay, if you do that, that's called plagiarism. It's a very serious offense in academic circles. But today, we're not going to talk about how to reference a source. We're going to talk about the two other aspects, how to write more formally and objectively. And what are the 10 common errors that students make when they are not formally? Okay, sorry, not 10, 12. Okay, here we go. So first of all, using contraction. All of these are what you should not do. Okay, so avoid using contractions. Sorry, in this case, don't use contractions at all. So don't say don't, say do not. Don't say isn't, say is not. All right, that's academic English. Next, avoid phrasal verbs. So for example, instead of saying go up, prices went up, say prices increased. Instead of saying take away, say remove. Avoid these multi-part verbs, right? Not as formal. Next, avoid idioms. Instead of saying it was A1, it was excellent. Okay? Avoid slang. Don't say kids, say children. Use the proper terminology for various subjects. Avoid pronouns. So for example, instead of saying you can see from the graph, right? We use the pronoun you. Instead of that, say the graph shows, right? Next, avoid negatives. For example, instead of saying something is not effective, just say it is ineffective. Instead of saying something is not positive, say it's negative. So avoid these kind of negatives. Next, avoid cliches. Now, what are cliches? Cliches are kind of idioms, basically, commonly used expressions, all right? And so on, kind of a common wisdom about different things. And so you want to avoid these kind of expressions. For example, instead of saying, when all is said and done, right? We use that in conversation, but you don't want to use it in your academic writing. Instead of saying that, you'd probably use an expression like in conclusion. Right? So next, there's certain kinds of punctuation, actually lots of rules about punctuation. And the kind of punctuation, the style of punctuation that you use in academic writing depends on the style guide that you have been asked to follow in your school, college, or university. Some very well-known style guides are the NLA or APA. These are certain style guides, and they tell you everything about how you need to write, what rules you need to follow, what the rules of punctuation, of quotation marks, of this and that. Okay, a lot more than what I'm covering here. But in general, I can just tell you that we don't see that many exclamation marks in academic writing. Okay, we do see a lot of semicolons. All right, that's kind of when do we use a semicolon? Do you remember? Okay, what's the difference between a period and a semicolon? A period clearly divides two sentences, and a semicolon has one sentence, which is a complete sentence. Then you put the semicolon, you do not capitalize the next letter, and the next part sentence is connected, and you want to show that it's connected to the first sentence, which is a very academic, intellectual, philosophical thing to do. So learn to use semicolons if you're in university, especially. Next, avoid vague language. Don't say a bit, a lot, kind of, sort of. The days for using that kind of language is over once the days are over once you've reached university, right? So instead of that, say a considerable number, a considerable amount. Okay, that's why sometimes they say that you can tell when someone has been to university because they use higher level language. Which doesn't mean that you cannot use higher level language if you have not been. You can still learn to use excellent language. Next, simple vocabulary. Don't use simple vocabulary. You want to use slightly more sophisticated vocabulary. Instead of saying a big difference, say a major distinction. Okay? Now, this is academic. Next, avoid giving your personal opinion. Okay? In academic circles, they're not so keen on knowing your opinion. Don't say I think, I believe, in my view. Instead of that, say, according to so and so, according to this research study, and mention particular research study, you have to always give credit to the source. Where did you get your information? Who wrote that book? What happened? Okay, you have this various styles and ways in which you can mention that information, but you must always give credit to the source and don't really give your opinion unless it's specifically asked for in a particular assignment. Okay? And last, don't use language which is too direct or too strong, because then maybe it cannot be justified. So you can't make very broad claims about anything. You have to be able to justify anything that you write, especially. Okay? So in other words, in academic English, your goal is to speak like your professor and write like your textbook. And if you can do that, then you're probably going to do very well in the academic world and also out there in your career. Okay? If you'd like to do a quiz on this, please go to our website, www.ingrid.com. Thanks for watching.
Okay. So you can see there's a level of formality to academic writing that's similar to what you did early on in your resume writing. In English, contractions are words, two words that are put together. You drop a letter, you put the apostrophe there to show that you've omitted the letter. So a word like do not becomes don't, okay? So in the case of academic writing, you want to go ahead and use both words and don't use don't. Avoid the contractions, don't put them in the paper, spell out the words, okay? And like I said, these are all things you'll worry more about when we're going through the editing stage. And we will have several more peer reviews that focus on things like word choice, transitions, the things that can help you sound more academic. That's part of what the main part of this class is shifting into an academic style of writing. So remember the rules, but a lot of them are rules that we talked about anyway. Don't use more words than you need, like the phrasal verbs, like if you have a lot of helping verbs in there, you can usually replace like a multi-part verb with one strong verb that better expresses what you're trying to say. Or things like good and big and small can be replaced, upgrade your language choices, your word choices. As far as what she's talking about with semicolons, they are more frequent in academic writing. If I pick on you for comma splices, so if I have noted that there are comma splices in your paper, you probably want to go ahead and replace those comma splices with semicolons, because that's what a semicolon does. Basically, is if you have a comma between two complete thoughts, you consider them to be closely related to each other, right? So let's look. Look at some examples, commas versus semicolons. So if you have a comma splice fairly common problem in there, you can solve your comma splice problem by instead using a semicolon between. So we've talked about the basic rules, right? If you have a fanboy dividing two complete thoughts, you're going to put a comma before it, right? For a semicolon, they're two complete thoughts also, but you don't have the fanboy between them, okay? I'm going home, I intend to stay there. So in this case, you feel like those are, that one thought follows pretty closely from the first one, okay? If they're two unrelated thoughts and you want to divide them, you're going to go ahead and use a period. But if you feel like these two thoughts are closely related or one follows from the next, it does give it a different sort of flavor when you're reading someone's paper. If they have a semicolon versus a period, it shows that they think those ideas are closely related to each other, okay? They couldn't make it to the summit and back before dark. They decided to camp for the night. So this is sort of an exact, situation that follows from the first one that they indicated, okay? It's also commonly used with, remember, it's only the fanboys that you can use the comma with. So if you have a different transition word in here, like moreover or however, often you'll need the semicolon between instead of a comma. So a lot of people make comma mistakes by putting a comma here between like moreover, however, or because. Don't use the comma, use a semicolon if you're using one of these to divide two complete thoughts. So this could stand by itself, and so could this. Okay. So become comfortable with semicolons. It's part of being college educated. You'll become comfortable with academic writing, which you're going to use in all of your classes. We're down to the last minute here. So your annotated bibliography is due today. So make sure that you get that in by midnight. You'll have 6 sources, a summary, the MLA information. I'm going to open up a session right after this for 10 minutes to answer any questions people may have. And otherwise, I will see you next week, and we'll start talking about how to integrate sources into your academic paper. Any questions? Let me know in the after session.
Bye-bye. Thank you, teacher.
Bye-bye.